Hello and welcome to mentalhealth.now. This is the third video in our brain series, and today we'll be talking about the hindbrain. But before we move forward, let's see what we have covered so far. So we have talked about the cerebral cortex, which is divided into these four lobes. I will add the link to these videos in the description for you. So talking about the hindbrain, before that we need to understand an important aspect about the brain, that is the structure of the brain. Now most commonly brain structure is conceptualized as three main regions. It is divided into three main regions based on the location: the hindbrain, the midbrain, and the forebrain. So for your better understanding, let's see how they are divided based on the location. So where the brain meets the spinal cord is called the hindbrain. It includes all the structures that are located at the hind part, that is the posterior of the brain. Okay, and the midbrain, as the name suggests, it is in the middle of the brain. It is located in the middle of the brain, and it is also known as mesencephalon. Above the midbrain is the forebrain, which includes the structures located in the front or the anterior part of the brain. So focusing on the hindbrain, as we have already seen that hindbrain has four important structures in it: medulla oblongata, pons, cerebellum, and reticular formation. Now, this is a diagram taken from our very own Atkinson and Hilgard psychology and introduction. So here you can see where all these four structures of the hindbrain lie. Okay, and just a very basic fact about the hindbrain is that all the important brain structures that are associated with the basic survival, they are located at the base of the brain, so they form part of the hindbrain. And evolutionary terms, may if we see, the hindbrain and the midbrain were the first brain structures to develop, and together they are called the brainstem. And sometimes brainstem is referred to as the most primitive region of the brain. Now, before we move into each of these structures, please notice the location of these structures. So here is the medulla, which is, it seems like a swelling, not exactly a swelling, but it seems like a swelling at the top of the spinal cord. Then above the medulla is the pons here. Then this is the cerebellum. It seems like, a pencil shaving. That is how I see it. And then finally the reticular formation here. Okay, here. Now, let's move to the first structure, that is the medulla oblongata. Now, it is, as we have seen, it is at the top of the spinal cord, at the very bottom of the brain, and we would not want this part to be damaged at all. Now, why? Because it has very important life-sustaining functions. It controls life-sustaining functions like the heartbeat, our blood pressure, breathing, respiration, and swallowing. It is involved in balance, motor coordination, and general arousal related to sleeping and waking. It's a reflex center. Now, the reflex center, it basically means that if there are irritants present in the stomach or the respiratory tract, it stimulates the medulla, it activates this reflex center. And what happens is, if there is an irritant in the stomach, you will vomit it out or cough. And if there is a irritant present in the respiratory tract, you're going to sneeze. So these are the reflexes that medulla oblongata takes care of. Then motor and sensory tracts cross over here, and it basically means to say that the left side of the brain controls the right half of the body and vice versa. So medulla oblongata has a very important part in this crossover as well. Now, what happens if medulla oblongata gets damaged? Injuries or diseases that affect the middle part of the medulla, which is also known as the medial medullary syndrome. So there will be partial paralysis on the opposite side of the body. We are talking about if there is an injury in the middle part of the medulla. So there can be partial paralysis, there can be loss of the senses of touch and position, and even partial paralysis of the tongue. If there is an injury or a disease in the lateral medulla, which is also called the lateral medulla syndrome, the injury leads to lateral medulla syndrome. So there's a loss of pain and temperature sensations, there's loss of gag reflex, there will be difficulty in swallowing, vertigo, vomiting, loss of coordination, etc. So this is what happens if the medulla oblongata gets damaged. Now the next structure in the hindbrain is the pons, which means bridge. It lies directly above the medulla oblongata, as we just saw. It connects the medulla with the cerebellum. So its name, as it basically means bridge, right? So you can see why. So it connects the medulla with the cerebellum, and it also serves as pathways for nerve fibers connecting the cerebral cortex with the cerebellum. It works with the medulla to regulate respiration, and it is very important in sleep and dreaming, arousal, and attentiveness. So, if you want to associate something with the pons for your exams, make it sleep, dreaming, arousal, attentiveness, and respiration. And we never say that there is only one part of the brain that is involved in a particular function. It is usually a cluster of structures all over the brain that are involved in one particular function. Okay, so we'll just say that pons have a major role to play in sleeping and dreaming. Now what happens if the pons gets damaged? So there will be weakness in, if say one side of the pons gets damaged, so the opposite side of the body will be, you will feel very weak on that side of the body. It can in severe cases lead to paralysis, and damage to this area has been shown to eliminate the REM sleep in experimental animals. So based on the experiments that researchers have done on animals, they have seen that the REM sleep, that is the time when you dream, that is eliminated completely if the pons gets damaged. Now the next structure in the hindbrain is the cerebellum, which means little brain, and it actually looks like a small brain that is mushrooming out of the pons. And if you remember, I just told you that to me it looks like a pencil shaving. That's the best way I could remember it. So what are the functions of the cerebellum? As we've already discussed, it looks like a small brain. It is divided into two lateral hemispheres, which are connected by a medial part, which is called the vermis. This is just for your knowledge sakes. It helps maintain balance and posture. It controls all the involuntary, rapid, fine motor movements. It produces coordinated and smooth voluntary movements like dancing, typing, walking, skating, even speech. It is even involved in speech. Now, what happens if cerebellum gets damaged? So there will be loss of coordination of movement. So there are a lot of different aspects that can be hindered, that can be we can have issues if the cerebellum gets damaged, because it has so many important functions. So I'm just going to list all of them here. Loss of coordination of motor movement, the inability to judge distance and when to stop, inability to perform rapid alternating movements, movement tremors, staggering, or you won't be able to walk appropriately, tendency towards falling, weak muscles, slurred speech, and abnormal eye movements. Now another important thing is that the alcohol, when you drink alcohol, so it hits the cerebellum, and that is why you're not able to walk uh, in a coordinated manner. You're very clumsy, and even your speech is slurred. Now the next is, that is the last fourth part of the hindbrain, is the reticular formation, and it is a structure that extends from the hindbrain into the midbrain, and it has a lot of interconnected nuclei in it. Now the most basic thing to know and learn about reticular formation is the 3 A's. It has its functions in 3 A's: arousal, alertness, and attention. Now we are able to selectively attend to certain kinds of functions through this reticular activating system. So this reticular formation has this system within, which is called the reticular activating system. What it does is, it selectively blocks and passes sensory information to the cerebral cortex. Now what does this mean? You're in a room and there's a very noisy AC that is turned on in that room. Now eventually what will happen is, you'll ignore the sound of that noise coming from the AC, and you will continue your work. But when the AC suddenly stops, you will be able to realize that the AC has stopped. Okay, so this is what selective awareness function that reticular activating system does for you. So you are able to selectively block and pass the sensory information to the higher functions. Next is electrical stimulation of the ascending reticular system arouses a sleeping cat to alert. Now, basically, what they did in an experiment was that they electrically stimulated this reticular formation part of the hindbrain in a cat. And what it did, it made the cat go to sleep completely, or if the cat was sleeping, brought the cat to alert consciousness. Okay, and that is the same thing. So either it will make you go to sleep, or it will make you alert. So it has both those functions. Now, what happens if it gets damaged? It will impair your consciousness, and if there is a severe damage to reticular formation, there can be a sleep-like coma or a persistent vegetative state. So far, we've discussed the four structures that form the hindbrain. Now, let's take a quick look at what we have discussed so far. So, we have discussed hindbrain, which is one part of this one region that falls under the structures of the brain. It has four important structures: the medulla oblongata, pons, cerebellum, and reticular formation. And you can see each of these structures in this diagram presented here for your better understanding. And we hope it is clear. And if you have any queries, I am going to post the references to all this information in the description. Feel free to check it out. So thank you so much for listening.
Don't forget to like and subscribe our channel. Hit the bell icon to get updates on every time we upload a new video. Stay connected and thank you so much for watching.